I've always had a fascination with art, paintings, sculptures, sketches. There's something about how artists pour their souls into their work that feels almost magical. So when I stumbled upon a post in an obscure forum about a hidden online gallery specializing in unique and haunting pieces, my curiosity got the better of me. The post was vague, almost cryptic. It described a collection of works that weren't just beautiful but alive. The link provided led to a minimalist webpage with no more than a black background and the words, "The Gallery of Forgotten Art, Experience the Eternal." Beneath the title was a single button that read Enter. Clicking it felt like stepping into another world. The page opened to reveal rows of thumbnails, each one a small, eerie glimpse of a larger painting. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Shadowy landscapes, distorted faces, and scenes that seemed to shift slightly if I stared too long. Each painting had a title: The Watcher in the Fog, Reflections of the Abyss, and The Forbidden Offering. The titles alone sent shivers down my spine. No artist names, no descriptions, just the haunting images. My eyes kept drifting to one in particular, a piece titled The Restless Figure. It depicted a shadowy form standing in an empty room, its outline hazy and undefined. Something about it pulled at me, an unexplainable urge to see it in person. The price was surprisingly low, almost suspiciously so. Beneath the price was a disclaimer: all purchases are final. The gallery is not responsible for any consequences. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the Buy Now button. The warning felt theatrical, like something added for effect, but it still gave me pause. Yet the longer I stared at the restless figure, the more I felt like it was staring back at me, waiting for me to take it. I clicked the button. The checkout process was as minimalistic as the site itself. No shipping details, no confirmation emails, just a thank you message and the cryptic note, "Your art will find you." It felt surreal, as if I had just made a deal with something I didn't fully understand. I told myself it was just a painting, an eccentric art piece from a mysterious seller. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I would check my front door constantly, half expecting the package to appear out of thin air. One evening, as I was about to head to bed, I heard a soft thud outside. My heart raced as I opened the door to find a plain, unmarked box sitting on the porch. There was no label, no indication of where it had come from, but I knew what it was. I carried the box inside, my hands trembling slightly. The weight of it felt heavier than I expected, as though it contained more than just a canvas. Sitting at my dining table, I carefully opened the box. Inside was the painting, wrapped in layers of protective paper. When I finally revealed it, my breath caught in my throat. The restless figure was even more unsettling in person. The shadowy form in the painting seemed darker, its edges more pronounced, and the empty room it stood in felt unnervingly familiar, though I couldn't place why. The most disturbing part was how the figure seemed to shift ever so slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it. It was subtle, just a tilt of the head or a faint ripple in the shadows, but enough to make my skin crawl. I leaned back in my chair, staring at it for what felt like hours. The room around me grew quieter, as if the painting was absorbing the sound. I told myself it was just an illusion, a trick of the light, or a result of my overactive imagination. But deep down, I felt a strange connection to the piece, as though it was meant for me. I decided to hang it in my living room, above the mantel where it could be the focal point of the room. As I stepped back to admire it, the figure seemed to loom larger than before, its shadow stretching slightly beyond the confines of the frame. That night, I dreamed of the painting. In the dream, I was standing in the room depicted in the restless figure. It was empty except for the shadowy form, which stood motionless in the center. I couldn't see its face, if it even had one, but I could feel its gaze piercing through me. I tried to move to leave the room, but my feet were rooted to the floor. The figure tilted its head slowly, as though curious, and then the dream dissolved into darkness. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The painting hung silently on the wall, unchanged but somehow more menacing in the dim light of dawn. I should have felt regret for buying it, but instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of fascination. I couldn't look away from it for long, and the urge to understand its secrets consumed me. Little did I know, bringing that painting into my home wasn't just a mistake, it was the beginning of something far darker than I could have imagined. The painting had a presence, an energy that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just another piece of art. It felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. Hanging on the wall above my mantel, the restless figure seemed to command the entire room. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I told myself it was the result of anticipation of finally having the piece I'd been obsessing over since I found it online. But as the days passed, I started noticing little things. The light in the room never seemed to fall quite right on the painting. No matter where the sun was or how I adjusted the lamps, shadows gathered around the frame, making the figure appear darker and more pronounced. At night, the effect was even more unsettling. The dim glow from my living room lamp cast long shadows across the walls, but the painting seemed to absorb the light, its details sharp and unnervingly vivid even in near darkness. I began to avoid the living room after sunset. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a faint noise coming from downstairs. It was soft at first, like the sound of a light breeze brushing against a window. But then it grew louder, a faint rustling, almost like fabric shifting. I sat up, my heart pounding. The house was silent, save for that sound. Grabbing my phone for light, I crept down the stairs, my footsteps barely making a sound on the wooden floor. When I reached the living room, the noise stopped. The painting hung where I had left it, motionless and unchanged. But the air in the room felt heavier, like walking into a space that had been occupied moments before. I stood there for a while, staring at it, half expecting the figure to move. I approached cautiously, the beam of my phone illuminating the canvas. Up close, the details of the painting were even more unnerving. The figure's edges seemed to shimmer faintly, as though it were vibrating just beneath the surface. The room felt colder, the silence pressing against my ears. I turned to leave, but just as I reached the stairs, I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I thought I might have imagined it. Stay. I froze, my hand gripping the banister. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried an unnatural weight, as though it had come from within the walls. My eyes darted back to the painting, but nothing had changed. Forcing myself to breathe, I hurried back to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe I'd been stressed, or maybe the painting was just triggering some deep-seated fear of the unknown. But the unease didn't go away. Every time I walked past the living room, I felt the painting's presence, as though it were watching me. It was irrational, I knew that, but the feeling was impossible to shake. Even when I wasn't looking directly at it, I could feel the weight of its gaze. I tried covering the painting with a sheet, hoping to dull its effect. But the moment I did, the whispers returned. They were faint at first, just a soft murmuring in the background, but they grew louder as the day went on. By nightfall, the whispers had become a cacophony, overlapping voices that filled the house. They weren't words I could understand, just fragmented sounds, rising and falling like a chant. I tore the sheet off in frustration, and the whispers stopped immediately. The silence that followed was almost worse. That night, the dream returned. I was back in the empty room, standing before the shadowy figure. This time, it was closer. Its outline was sharper, its movements more deliberate. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but no sound came out. The figure tilted its head, just as it had in the first dream, but this time it raised an arm, pointing towards something behind me. I turned slowly, my body heavy and unresponsive, and saw another painting hanging on the wall. It was blank, but as I stared at it, faint shapes began to emerge. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The house was dark and silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I got up and went downstairs, drawn to the painting despite my growing fear. It looked the same as always, dark, shadowy, and hauntingly still. But as I stared at it, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the corner of the room depicted in the painting, there was a faint outline of another figure. It was barely visible, just a shadow within a shadow, but it hadn't been there before. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. Was the painting changing, or had I simply missed that detail before? Either way, it felt like a warning, or perhaps an invitation. The whispers returned, soft and insistent, their words forming just beyond the edge of comprehension. Finish it. I didn't know what that meant, but the words echoed in my mind long after I walked away. The painting wasn't just art, it was something more, something alive, and it wanted something from me. The painting's presence grew stronger with each passing day, like a weight pressing down on the air in my home. It wasn't just a piece of art anymore. It felt like a living thing, something that didn't belong in this world but had forced its way into mine. I tried to avoid it, spending as little time in the living room as possible, but it didn't matter. The painting demanded attention. Its image burned in my mind even when I wasn't looking at it. The shadowy figure etched into my thoughts like a scar. I began hearing the whispers more frequently. They no longer waited for nightfall. They came at all hours, faint and insistent, rising and falling like a distant chant. The words were still hard to make out, but one phrase became clear. Finish it. I didn't know what it meant, but the command carried a strange urgency, like a clock ticking down towards something inevitable. At first, I thought the changes in the painting were subtle, shadows shifting, shapes deepening. But one evening, as I stared at it from across the room, I realized just how much it had evolved. The empty room depicted in the painting was no longer empty. The shadowy figure in the center had grown more defined, its edges sharper, and its presence more imposing. Worse, the faint outline I noticed before, the second figure in the corner, was now clearer. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It had a shape, a form, and it was unmistakably human. It was me. My reflection, my exact likeness, stood in the corner of the painted room, its eyes hollow and its posture unnaturally stiff. I felt my stomach drop as the realization hit me. The painting wasn't just changing, it was absorbing me, pulling pieces of my reality into its world. I tried to look away, but my gaze kept drifting back to it, as though the painting had a gravity all its own. The figure that was me seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking, its head tilting ever so slightly, mimicking the gestures of the shadowy form in the center. The whispers grew louder that night, forming fragmented sentences that sent chills down my spine. Finish what you started. Bring it to life. You can't stop now. I didn't understand what the painting wanted, but I felt its pull growing stronger. My dreams became more vivid, more disturbing, each one drawing me deeper into the empty room where the shadowy figure waited. In one dream, the room was no longer silent. The figure in the center began to speak, its voice low and resonant, echoing off the empty walls. You brought me this far, it said. Finish the work. Complete the art. When I tried to respond, my voice came from the other figure, the one that looked like me. I could feel myself speaking, but the words weren't my own. You're not real, I said, my voice trembling in the dream. You're just a painting. The shadowy figure laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. Am I, it said, or are you? I woke up in a panic, my body drenched in sweat. The house was dark and silent, but the painting's presence was suffocating, its pull undeniable. That day, I tried to move it, to take it down and lock it away. But the moment I touched the frame, a shock ran through my hand, like static electricity, but colder, sharper. The whispers erupted in my mind, screaming now. Don't. Leave it. I stumbled back, clutching my hand. The painting remained on the wall, unmoved, its shadowy figure more imposing than ever. I started noticing other changes around the house. Objects moved when I wasn't looking, small things at first, like a book shifting on a table or a chair turning slightly. But soon, it escalated. One morning, I woke to find the furniture in my living room rearranged, the couch and chairs forming a semicircle around the painting. It was as if the entire room had been reoriented to focus on it. The whispers returned, louder and more persistent. Finish it. Bring it to life. I began to lose track of time. Days blurred together, each one marked by the oppressive presence of the painting. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't concentrate on anything but the figure in the canvas and the whispers in my head. It felt like the painting was drawing me in, pulling me closer to something I couldn't see but could feel in my bones. One evening, as I sat in front of it, I noticed something new. The shadowy figure in the center raised its arm, pointing directly at the version of me in the corner of the painting. The whispers became a chant, overlapping voices that filled the room. You are the key. You are the artist. Finish the work. I didn't know what they meant, but I felt an overwhelming urge to pick up a brush, to add something to the painting, to complete whatever it was demanding of me. But I resisted, fear gripping me. I knew that whatever the painting wanted, it wasn't for my benefit. Still, the pull was undeniable. Every time I looked at it, the urge to pick up a brush grew stronger. The painting wasn't just influencing me, it was consuming me. My reflection in the canvas grew clearer with each passing day, its movements more deliberate, its eyes more hollow. I knew I was running out of time. The painting wasn't just a piece of art. It was a portal, a doorway to something dark and ancient, and it wanted me to step through. I couldn't keep living like this, with the painting taking over my life. I had to know more about it, about the gallery, and about why it felt like it was slowly consuming me. The whispers, the shifting shadows, and the reflection in the painting, they were all connected, and I was determined to find answers. I returned to the forum where I had first discovered the link to the gallery. Scrolling through old threads, I searched for any mention of the restless figure or its mysterious creator. Most posts were dead ends, filled with vague warnings or urban legends. Then I stumbled upon a thread titled, "The Gallery of Forgotten Art, a Curse or a Gift?" The post was long, written by someone claiming to have purchased a painting from the same gallery. Their description of the experience was chillingly familiar, whispers, shifting details in the artwork, and an unshakable sense of dread. But what caught my attention was a name buried in the post. Victor Mallory, an artist whose work was supposedly featured in the gallery. According to the author, Mallory was a reclusive painter from the early 1900s, known for his obsession with capturing the essence of the soul in his art. The thread mentioned rumors that Mallory's paintings weren't just works of art. They were vessels, capable of trapping the essence of those who viewed them. My heart sank as I read further. The author claimed that Mallory disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind a collection of unfinished paintings. These works, it was said, were cursed, each one capable of pulling its viewer into the world within the canvas. I couldn't ignore the parallels to my own experience. The painting in my living room wasn't just a creation. It was alive, and it was pulling me in piece by piece. The post ended with a chilling warning. The gallery isn't just a place to buy art. It's a trap. Every painting has a purpose, and once you're chosen, there's no escaping it. I began digging deeper into Victor Mallory's life, searching through online archives and old articles. Information was scarce, but I managed to piece together fragments of his story. Mallory was once considered a genius, a rising star in the art world. His early works were celebrated for their emotional depth and haunting beauty. But as his fame grew, so did his obsession with creating the perfect painting, one that would transcend the boundaries of reality and capture the very essence of life. Accounts from those who knew him described his descent into madness. He became increasingly withdrawn, speaking of visions and voices that guided his hand as he painted. One article mentioned a particularly chilling claim. Mallory believed that in order to create true art, the artist had to give a part of themselves to the work, literally. His final series, known as the Eternal Collection, was never completed. Mallory vanished before the series could be unveiled, leaving behind only whispers of its existence. The deeper I delved, the more questions arose. How had Mallory's work ended up in the gallery? And why had it chosen me? I reached out to the forum user who had written about Mallory, hoping they could provide more insight. To my surprise, they responded almost immediately. Their message was brief but chilling. "You're in too deep. The painting has already marked you. Your only hope is to finish what Mallory started." I stare at the message, my chest tightening. What did it mean to finish the painting? Was that what the whispers had been urging me to do all along? The next night, the dream returned. I was back in the room depicted in the restless figure, standing face to face with the shadowy form in the center. This time, it spoke clearly, its voice low and resonant. "You've seen the truth. Now you must complete it." I tried to respond, to ask what it meant, but the figure raised a hand, silencing me. It pointed toward the blank painting on the wall, which now shimmered faintly, as though waiting for something. When I woke, the words echoed in my mind, "Finish it." I couldn't ignore the pull any longer. The painting wasn't just art. It was a doorway, a connection to Mallory's unfinished work, and it was demanding that I complete it. But how? I wasn't an artist, and I had no idea what the painting wanted from me. I decided to return to the gallery's website, hoping to find more answers. When I entered the link, the page looked different, darker, more ominous. The thumbnails of the paintings were gone, replaced by a single image, the restless figure. Beneath the painting were 3 words, "Complete the art." I clicked on the image, and a new page loaded. It contained nothing but a single sentence: "The artist's soul lives within the canvas. To free it, you must give your own." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. Was that what the painting wanted? To trap me in its world, just as Mallory had been trapped in his? I shut the laptop, my mind racing. The painting was more than a curse. It was a prison, and I was its next victim. The whispers grew louder that night, their words clearer than ever. Bring it to life. Complete the work. Become eternal. The shadows in the room stretched toward the painting, their movements deliberate and predatory. I knew I was running out of time. The painting wasn't just a piece of art. It was a living entity, and it was consuming me piece by piece. I had to decide, would I confront it or would I let it take me? The painting's changes were no longer subtle. Every day, it grew darker, its shadowy depths reaching further into the room. The figure in the center had become sharper, its form more defined. It now had features, though they were blurred and twisted, as if obscured by smoke. And the figure that resembled me, it was no longer a faint outline in the corner. It had stepped forward, its posture mimicking mine, its movements subtle but deliberate. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was becoming something else, something alive. I couldn't look at the painting without feeling like it was pulling me in, dragging me closer to whatever lay within its depths. The whispers no longer came from the room. They came from the painting itself, growing louder and more insistent with each passing hour. Finish the art. Bring it to life. You are the key. I tried ignoring it, focusing on work, on anything else, but the painting wouldn't let me. Its presence was suffocating, a constant weight pressing down on my chest. One night, I noticed something horrifying. The room depicted in the painting was no longer just any empty space. It was my living room. The furniture was the same, the walls the same color. Even the small details like the stack of books on the coffee table were perfectly replicated. The realization made my stomach churn. The painting wasn't just changing, it was consuming my reality, pulling my world into its own. I stood there, staring at it in disbelief, when I saw the shadowy figure in the center move. Its head tilted slowly, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. It raised a hand, pointing directly at the version of me now standing just behind it. The whispers grew deafening, their words overlapping in a chaotic chorus. Complete the art. Finish what was started. Set it free. The figure that resembled me stepped forward, its movements perfectly mirroring my own. I reached out instinctively, and so did it, our hands almost touching the surface of the canvas. For a moment, I felt like I was falling, the room spinning around me as the painting's world and mine blurred together. I stumbled back, breaking the connection, and the whispers stopped abruptly. But the painting had changed again. The shadowy figure in the center now stood beside the version of me, its hand resting on my doppelganger's shoulder as though claiming it. I couldn't sleep that night, haunted by the image. The painting wasn't just alive. It was evolving, growing stronger with each passing day. And I was at the center of it all. The next morning, I woke to find something chilling. The walls of my living room were covered in faint, swirling patterns, markings that matched the intricate lines and shadows in the painting. The patterns pulsed faintly, as though alive, and the air in the room felt colder, heavier. It was as if the painting's world was spilling out, bleeding into mine. The whispers returned, soft but relentless. Finish it. Bring it to life. You are the key. Desperate for answers, I returned to the forum where I had first learned about the gallery. I posted a plea for help, describing everything that had happened since the painting arrived. The responses were few, but one stood out. It was from an anonymous user who claimed to have seen something similar. Their message was cryptic but chilling. The painting isn't just a creation, it's a portal. The artist's soul is trapped inside, and it's using you to escape. If you don't finish the art, you'll take their place. My stomach turned as I read the words. Was that what the painting wanted? To trade places with me, to pull me into its world while a shadowy figure took my place? That night, the painting changed again. The version of me inside the frame now stood directly in front of the shadowy figure, their forms almost merging. The whispers grew louder, their words forming a single clear command. Finish the art. Complete the cycle. I felt a pull stronger than ever before, an overwhelming urge to pick up a brush and add to the painting. It was as if my hands weren't my own, as though something inside me was compelling me to obey. I resisted, locking myself in my bedroom and trying to block out the whispers. But the painting's presence was everywhere, its influence seeping into every corner of my mind. The dreams returned, more vivid and terrifying than ever. I was back in the painted room, standing before the shadowy figure and my doppelganger. This time, the figure reached out, its hand brushing against mine. "Finish what you started," it said, its voice low and resonant. "Bring me to life." When I woke, the painting had changed again. My doppelganger now stood in the center, its features a perfect replica of mine. The shadowy figure loomed behind it, its form more defined, its presence more imposing. The whispers were relentless now, constant hum in the back of my mind. I couldn't escape the painting's pull, its demand for completion. I knew I was running out of time. The painting wasn't just evolving, it was consuming me, piece by piece. And if I didn't act soon, I would lose myself to it entirely. I couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. The painting wasn't just an accident of fate. Its presence in my life felt deliberate, like it had been waiting for me all along. I needed to understand why. I returned to my research on Victor Mallory, hoping to find some clue as to why this particular painting had chosen me. The more I read, the more I uncovered about the enigmatic artist's descent into madness and the cursed works he left behind. It was during this deep dive that I stumbled across an old photograph in an online archive. It was a portrait of Mallory in his youth, standing beside a much older man who looked eerily familiar. My stomach dropped when I realized why the older man looked so familiar. I had seen his face before, in a faded photograph tucked away in my grandmother's attic. The man in the picture was my great-great-grandfather. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of the connection. Mallory wasn't just some random artist whose work had crossed my path. There was a familial tie. Somehow, my family had been connected to his work, and I was now caught in the web of his cursed legacy. I called my mother, hoping she could shed some light on the connection. She was hesitant at first, reluctant to discuss what she called our family's darkest chapter. According to her, my great-great-grandfather had been a patron of Victor Mallory, funding many of his early works. But their relationship had soured when Mallory began creating his final series, The Eternal Collection. My ancestor had called the series an abomination and severed ties with the artist. Soon after, strange things began happening to my family. Members of the household reported hearing whispers, seeing shadows that didn't belong, and feeling watched. The rumors reached their peak when my great-great-grandfather suddenly disappeared. His body was never found, and the only clue was a letter he had written to his wife the night before his disappearance. The letter was short and cryptic. "The art is alive. It watches, it waits, and it demands more. If you hear the whispers, do not listen. If you see the shadows, do not follow. Destroy it before it consumes us all." The letter had always been considered a family mystery, dismissed as the ramblings of a troubled man. But now it felt like a warning that had gone unheeded. I asked my mother if she still had the letter. She did, tucked away in an old box of family documents. She sent me a scan of it, and as I read the faded words, my heart sank. The description of the whispers, the shadows, the painting's demands, it was all the same. The same curse that had haunted my great-great-grandfather was now haunting me. The connection wasn't just historical, it was personal. My family's involvement with Mallory had marked us, and now the painting had returned to claim me. The realization sent a chill down my spine. The painting wasn't just any cursed artifact. It was a fragment of a story that had been playing out for generations. And I was the next chapter. That night, the dreams returned with a vengeance. I found myself back in the painted room, but this time it was filled with people, figures I recognized from old family photographs. They stood motionless, their eyes hollow, and their faces blank, as if they had been drained of life. At the center of the room stood the shadowy figure, its presence more imposing than ever. "You've inherited the burden," it said, its voice echoing in the stillness. "Your family began this, and now you must end it." I tried to respond, to ask how I could end something I didn't understand, but the figure raised a hand, silencing me. "Finish the art," it said. "Complete the cycle." When I woke, my hands were trembling, and my breath came in shallow gasps. The painting had changed again. The version of me in the painting now stood in the center, its features sharp and vivid. The shadowy figure loomed behind it, its form almost fully defined, and in the background, faint outlines of other figures began to emerge. They were my family, my great-great-grandfather, my grandmother, and others whose faces I recognized from old photographs. The painting wasn't just a portal, it was a prison, and my family was trapped inside. The whispers returned that morning, clearer than ever. "Finish it, set them free, or join them." I couldn't ignore the painting any longer. It wasn't just about me. It was about my family, about a curse that had been passed down for generations. I knew I had to confront it, to face whatever lay within its depths. But I also knew that doing so might mean losing myself entirely. The painting's presence became overwhelming. It wasn't just confined to the living room anymore. It felt like it was seeping into every corner of my house, infecting every aspect of my life. The whispers were constant now, filling the air with fragmented commands and haunting murmurs. They no longer seemed to come from the painting itself, but from the very walls of my home. Finish it. Free them. Time is slipping. The house itself began to change. The walls felt closer, the air heavier, and the light dimmer. Objects moved on their own, books sliding across tables, chairs shifting positions, and doors creaking open and shut without explanation. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway. At first, I thought someone had broken in, but as I crept out of bed, I realized the sound wasn't coming from any intruder. It was coming from the shadows. The shadows on the walls seemed alive, twisting and stretching as though they were reaching for me. When I turned on the lights, they snapped back into place, but the sense of being watched remained. I tried to ignore it, but the painting refused to be ignored. Every time I passed it, the figure inside seemed more lifelike, its features clearer, its stance more deliberate. And the figure that resembled me, it now stood at the very center of the painting, its posture mirroring mine perfectly. I began having waking visions, fleeting moments where reality seemed to blur. I catch glimpses of the painted room superimposed over my living room, the figures inside moving slightly as though watching me. Once I turned away from the painting, only to see its shadow cast on the opposite wall, as though it had stepped out of the frame. The whispers grew louder, their words forming a single, clear message. Time is running out. The manifestations escalated quickly. One evening, as I sat at my desk trying to distract myself with work, the lights flickered violently. When they steadied, the painting was no longer on the wall. I found it propped against the desk beside me, its shadowy figure closer than ever, its eyes hollow and piercing. I screamed, stumbling back. But when I blinked, it was gone, back on the wall where it had always been. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself in the painted room, standing before the shadowy figure. It no longer spoke, it only watched, its presence oppressive and suffocating. One night, I woke to find my reflection in the mirror staring back at me. But it wasn't me. It was the version of me from the painting, its eyes dark and empty, its expression twisted into something unrecognizable. I smashed the mirror in a panic, but the reflection lingered for a moment before fading away. The line between my world and the paintings had become blurred. The house no longer felt like mine. It felt like an extension of the cursed canvas, a part of the prison it was creating around me. The whispers no longer came from the walls. They came from inside my head, relentless and inescapable. Finish it. Free them. Join us. The figures in the painting multiplied. My family members became clearer, their faces etched with fear and despair. The shadowy figure in the center stood over them all, its form now almost fully human. The figure that resembled me was different. It no longer seemed trapped. It seemed to have taken on a life of its own. Its movements were deliberate, its posture commanding, as though it had become the master of the painted world. One evening, I noticed something horrifying. The figure that resembled me was holding a paintbrush, and in its other hand was a blank canvas. The whispers reached a fever pitch, their words overlapping into a chaotic chorus. Finish it. Set them free. Time is slipping. The house felt alive now, its walls pulsing faintly, its shadows creeping closer with every passing moment. I knew I couldn't ignore the painting any longer. I tried to destroy it, smashing it with a hammer, but the blows passed through it as though it were made of air. I tried burning it, but the flames refused to touch it, flickering out the moment they neared the canvas. The painting was indestructible, and its demands were clear. I had to finish it. I stood before the painting, trembling as I reached out to touch the frame. The moment my fingers brushed the wood, the whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. The room around me faded, dissolving into darkness. When the world came back into focus, I was no longer in my living room. I was inside the painting. The painted room was cold and empty, its shadows deeper and more oppressive than they had ever seemed from the outside. The shadowy figure stood before me, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. You've come, it said, its voice low and resonant. Now you must decide. Behind the figure, my family stood motionless, their eyes wide with fear. The figure that resembled me stood among them, its expression eerily calm. The shadowy figure stepped closer, its presence suffocating. Finish the art, it said. Bring them back, or take their place. I realized then that the painting wasn't just a prison. It was a choice. The artist's curse had trapped my family, but it was offering me a chance to free them. The whispers returned, softer now, but no less urgent. Finish it. Set them free. I didn't know if I could trust the shadowy figure, but I knew I couldn't leave my family trapped. Standing inside the painted room, the cold air seemed to seep into my bones. The walls, once blank and shadowy, were now alive with faint whispers that echoed the commands I had heard for weeks. Finish it. Set them free. Time is slipping. The shadowy figure stood directly before me, its presence oppressive and inescapable. Behind it, my family stood frozen, their expressions a mix of fear and despair. My doppelganger lingered among them, its hollow eyes staring at me with unnerving calmness. What do you want from me? I demanded, my voice shaking but resolute. The figure tilted its head, its shadowy form rippling as though it were made of smoke. The same thing I've always wanted, it said, its voice low and resonant. The art must be finished. You are the artist now. I'm not an artist, I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. I don't know what to do. The figure took a step closer, and the room seemed to darken further. The art is not created with skill, it said. It is created with sacrifice. I glanced at my family, their forms flickering faintly like candle flames. The figure followed my gaze and gestured toward them. They have given their essence to the art, it said. To free them, you must do the same. My heart pounded as the weight of its words sank in. The painting wasn't just a trap. It was a prison that demanded pieces of its victims to sustain itself. I looked back at the doppelganger, standing unnervingly still. It wasn't just a reflection of me. It was a piece of me, taken and twisted into something that belonged to the painting. What happens if I refuse? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The figure's grin widened, its hollow eyes glowing brighter. Then you will remain here, it said, and the cycle will continue. The art will never be complete. You will become part of it, as they have. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and chaotic, filling the room with a cacophony of commands. Finish it. Complete the art. Time is slipping. I covered my ears, but the whispers seemed to come from within my own mind. Why me? I shouted. Why my family? The figure's grin faded slightly, its form rippling again as though it were struggling to remain stable. Your family was chosen long ago, it said. They sought to destroy the eternal art. They failed. Now you have the chance to succeed. The weight of the truth hit me like a blow. My great-great-grandfather's actions had set this curse in motion, and my family had been paying the price ever since. I was the last link in the chain, the final piece in the puzzle. The figure gestured toward the doppelganger. This is your essence, it said. You must reclaim it to complete the art. But doing so comes at a cost. The whispers softened, becoming a low, rhythmic chant. Take it back. Finish the art. I stepped forward, my hands trembling as I reached out toward the doppelganger. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I saw a flash of emotion in its face. Fear, sadness, and something that looked almost like understanding. As my hand made contact with the doppelganger, a jolt of cold shot through me, and the room around me seemed to blur and shift. Memories flooded my mind, moments I had forgotten, avoided, or buried deep. I saw my great-great-grandfather standing in an empty studio, his hands trembling as he held a paintbrush. I saw Victor Mallory, his face pale and haunted, pouring his soul into the canvas. And then I saw myself standing before the painting, the same fear and determination etched into my expression. The doppelganger dissolved into a swirl of shadows, and I felt a rush of energy as it merged back into me. The room shook violently, the walls rippling like water as the shadowy figure stepped back. You have reclaimed your essence, it said, its voice tinged with something that sounded almost like approval. But the art is not yet complete. I turned to the figures of my family, their forms flickering like dying flames. What do I do? I asked, desperation in my voice. The figure gestured toward the blank canvas that had appeared on the far wall. Finish the cycle, it said. Complete the art, and they will be free. I approached the canvas cautiously, unsure of what to do. A paintbrush appeared in my hand, as though it had been placed there by an unseen force. The whispers returned, guiding my movements. Paint what you fear. Paint what you've lost. Paint the truth. I closed my eyes and let the whispers guide me. My hand moved on its own, strokes of color appearing on the canvas as though they were pulled from my very soul. When I opened my eyes, the painting was complete. It depicted the room I stood in, but now it was filled with light. The shadows banished. My family stood within the painting, their expressions calm and serene. The shadowy figure remained, but its form was smaller, less imposing. It seemed to bow slightly before dissolving into the light. The whispers fell silent, and the room around me began to fade. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in my living room. The painting hung on the wall, but it was no longer dark and oppressive. The figures inside were at peace, their faces filled with gratitude. The air in the room felt lighter. The oppressive weight finally lifted. The curse was broken. The painting hung in my living room, transformed. The oppressive darkness that had consumed it was gone, replaced by a serene glow. My family's figures remained within, their expressions calm and free of fear. For the first time in weeks, the house felt like mine again. But the questions remained. Why had the curse existed in the first place? And why did it choose to end with me? I couldn't leave the mystery unsolved. The connection to Victor Mallory and my family's involvement gnawed at me. I had broken the cycle, but the pieces didn't fully fit together. I needed answers. I returned to the forums and archives, digging deeper into Victor Mallory's life. I found an old journal entry attributed to him, scanned and uploaded by an anonymous user. The handwriting was uneven, almost frantic, and the words were chilling. The art is eternal. It demands pieces of the soul to thrive. I have given all I can, but it is not enough. It reaches beyond me now, seeking others to complete what I cannot. It is alive, and it will never die. The entry was dated a week before Mallory disappeared. I searched for more connections between Mallory and my family. Through genealogical records, I discovered that my great-great-grandfather had purchased one of Mallory's early works, a painting titled The Binding. The description of the binding matched what I had experienced, a painting that seemed to shift and change, pulling its viewers into its world. It was the first of Mallory's cursed pieces, the foundation of what would become the Eternal Collection. The record suggested that the binding had been destroyed in a fire decades ago, but its influence clearly lived on. I realized that Mallory's curse wasn't just about the paintings, it was about his obsession. He had poured so much of himself into his work that his very soul had become entangled with it, creating an entity that demanded constant nourishment. My family's connection to Mallory had made us targets. My great-great-grandfather had tried to destroy the curse, but instead, it had latched onto our bloodline, waiting for someone else to continue the cycle. And that someone had been me. As I pieced the story together, I began to see the larger picture. The curse wasn't just about Mallory or my family. It was about the nature of creation itself. Mallory had sought immortality through his art, but in doing so, he had created a parasite, something that fed on the souls of those who viewed it. The art wasn't just a reflection of him. It was him, fragmented and eternal, spreading its influence through anyone who came into contact with it. I returned to the painting in my living room, staring at it for hours. The figures of my family were still there, their faces peaceful, but the shadowy figure was gone. I couldn't help but wonder, was the curse truly broken, or had I simply passed it on? The painting no longer felt dangerous, but its presence still carried a weight, a reminder of what had been and what could still be. The whispers were gone, but sometimes late at night, I thought I could hear faint echoes in the distance. I decided to document everything that had happened, hoping to leave a record for anyone who might encounter something similar in the future. I described the painting, the whispers, the connection to Mallory, and the choices I had to make. As I wrote, I felt a strange sense of closure. The story wasn't just about the curse, it was about the choices we make and the consequences they carry. But even as I tried to move on, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that the painting wasn't done with me yet. A week later, I received an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "The Eternal Collection lives on." The message was brief. "You've finished your part, but the art is eternal. Others will come, just as you did." The cycle never truly ends. Attached to the email was an image of a painting I didn't recognize. It depicted a dark, empty room with faint shadows beginning to take shape. I closed the email, my hands trembling. The painting wasn't mine. It had passed on to someone else. I stared at the painting in my living room, wondering if it had chosen its next victim or if I had simply been another chapter in its endless story. The whispers might have been silenced for now, but the curse was still out there, waiting for its next artist to finish the work. The realization that the curse might still be active consumed me. The email, the painting in my living room, the faint whispers I thought I'd silenced. It was all proof that I hadn't truly ended the nightmare. I knew I couldn't live with the possibility that the curse would find someone else, that another family could be pulled into the darkness like mine. I had to find a way to break the cycle once and for all, even if it meant risking everything I had left. I began researching everything I could about breaking curses. Old folklore, occult practices, obscure forums, they all pointed to one consistent idea. Curses tied to an object could only be destroyed by severing the object's connection to its creator. Victor Mallory's soul was bound to the Eternal Collection. If I could destroy that link, the curse might finally end. But destroying the painting wasn't an option. I had tried everything, burning, breaking, and even attempting to tear it apart. The canvas was indestructible, its power far beyond the physical. I needed to go deeper. I needed to confront the painting at its source. The thought terrified me. Every time I had interacted with a painting's world, I had barely escaped. But this time, I couldn't afford to leave anything unfinished. The painting demanded completion, and if that was the only way to destroy the curse, I would see it through. One night, I stood before the painting, clutching the paintbrush that had appeared in my hand during my last encounter with the shadowy figure. The whispers were faint now, almost encouraging, as if the painting itself was waiting for me to take the final step. I touched the brush to the canvas. The world around me dissolved into darkness, and I found myself back in the painted room. It was different this time. The room wasn't empty. Figures from the painting stood around me, my family, other faces I didn't recognize, and Victor Mallory himself. Mallory's form was faint, barely more than a shadow, but his presence was overwhelming. He stepped forward, his voice low and tired. "You've come to finish what I started," he said. "But you don't understand what that means." "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice trembling. "Why did you create this? Why did you trap yourself and others in your art?" Mallory's shadow flickered, and for a moment I saw the man he had once been, young, ambitious, and driven by a desire for immortality. "I wanted to create something eternal," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "Something that would outlive me, something that would make me more than a man. But I didn't understand the cost." He gestured to the room around us, the walls rippling like water. "The art took more than I intended. It took my soul, my essence, and it demanded more. Every viewer became a part of it, feeding its hunger. Then why did it choose me?" I asked. Mallory's hollow eyes met mine. "Your family tried to destroy it. They thought they could break the cycle, but all they did was anger it. The painting doesn't forget. It waits. And it chose you because you carry their blood, their unfinished business." I clenched my fists, anger and fear swirling inside me. How do I end this? How do I stop it from hurting anyone else? Mallory hesitated. "To end it, you must give it what it wants. But once it's complete, it will no longer have power over the living." The painted room began to shift, its edges fraying as shadows crept closer. Mallory's form grew dimmer, his voice softer. "You must finish the art," he said. "But know this, once you do, you will never leave this place." The weight of his words hit me like a blow. To break the curse, I would have to give myself to the painting completely. The figures of my family stepped forward, their expressions pleading. They didn't speak, but their eyes said everything. They wanted me to leave to live. I turned to the blank canvas that had appeared on the far wall. It shimmered faintly, waiting for my final strokes. The whispers returned, softer now, almost gentle. "Finish it. Free them. Set them free." I picked up the brush, my hands trembling. I knew what I had to do. As I painted, the shadows receded, and the room filled with light. The figures around me began to dissolve, their forms fading into the glow. I painted everything the whispers had guided me to, the pain, the loss, and the truth of what the curse had taken. Each stroke felt like a piece of my soul being poured into the canvas. The painted room shimmered, its walls cracking and splintering. Mallory's voice echoed faintly. "You've done what I couldn't. You freed them." The room collapsed into light, and I felt myself falling. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my living room. The painting was gone. The walls were bare, the air light and still. I walked through the house, half expecting the whispers to return, but there was nothing. The curse was broken. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal. I documented everything, leaving behind a record of the events in case the curse ever tried to resurface. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. The painting was gone, its power severed, its cycle finally complete. For the first time in generations, my family was free.